I'm going to go ahead and just start off by making some introductions to Ron Bayman, who is going to be our host tonight. First of all, I'm Aria McKenna, one of the founding members of HPAC. But Ron Bayman is an associate professor of economics, he's retired, and an adjunct professor of traditions, sustainability, currently at the Benedictine University in Lisle, Illinois. He is a radical or progressive heterodox economist with a long career in academia, including the University of Chicago and other institutions, state and local policy, and the private sector. He has published over 30 academic papers and 3 books, as well as numerous popular reports, articles, and blogs, and is a longtime member of the editorial board of the Review of Radical Political Economics. Late in his career, he pivoted to focus on climate policy and co-founded Healthy Planet Action Coalition, where he continues to serve as convening coordinator and, among many other projects, has led work on 2 HPAC peer-reviewed Oxford Open Climate Change papers addressing the urgent need to cool. He holds a PhD and an MA with honors, both in economics from the New School for Social Research in New York City, did graduate work in mathematics at the University of California, Berkeley, and graduated magna cum laude with a BSc in mathematics and physics from Hebrew University, Israel. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you all. Thank you, Aria, and thank you everyone for coming out and for all of our listeners, online listeners. Yes, I'm very happy to be coming back to New York, where I spent many years, both as a student and a lot of my family, most of my family, in fact, is from here. My dad is from Flatbush and Bensonhurst, actually, in Brooklyn. What we're going to do now is we're going to convene our first panel of three people. 2 of them are right here, Aria McKenna and William Blecker from the Brooklyn Society. And I am going to introduce them in the order in which they will be speaking. Bill will be welcoming us all to the Brooklyn Society for Ethical Culture. By the way, I am also an ethical culture person. I was a longtime member of the Essex Society and then the Chicago Society, and which has one of the ways in which I contacted Bill. But in any case, so I will introduce Bill, who will then welcome us and make a short presentation. 10 minutes, and then we will move on to, I'll introduce Bill, I will introduce Aria, and I will introduce Herb Simmons, who is with us online, who is, in that order, and they will make presentations in that order, and after we're done, about 10 minutes each, we'll have 20 minutes for questions and answers for this first panel. So let me start with Bill, who I'm very, very happy to have met online, and this is the first time I've met him in person. William Blecker is a technologist, parent, and climate organizer. He is the CEO of Scaled Sources, a company building advanced software generation tools for trading systems. He previously held senior roles at Amazon, Medallia, Travelocity, and other technology companies, where he focused on scaling systems and teams. Bill is an organizer and strategist with climate advocacy organization Extinction Rebellion, NYC. He is also the board president of Brooklyn Ethical. So that's Bill, and as I said, we're very, very happy that Bill was able to help us with this, help organize this. Our next person who's going to speak is Aria McKenna, and I will be pulling up her, here we go. With Roots, Arya is an actress. So with Roots as an actress, writer, director, and producer, Arya McKenna's experience has run the gamut from appearing on stage with Paul Rudd and Adam Scott to organizing a scientific advisory panel for director-producer Adam McKay's Hyperobject Industries, lobbying senators in and out of Washington, D.C. with Citizens Climate Lobby, and helping to co-found the Healthy Planet Action Coalition to restore a safe climate through the holistic Climate Triad. She was part of the narrative division of the Healthy Climate Alliance and on-camera host for Green TV and Long Island International Film Expo. She's been keynote speaker for Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, helped produce American Renewable Energy Institute's ARE Day, ARED Day Summit.
Our Day.
What's that?
Our Day.
Our Day Summit, sorry, and is on the Climate and Energy Working Group for the American Sustainable Business Council and the Advisory Board for Love the Wild Foundation. Her mission is to use storytelling to break down the cultural barriers that keep us from restoring a safe climate. She is currently pitching her dramatic political suspense TV series, Revolution Earth, which she co-created with Golden Globe and Peabody Award-winning writer-producer Jeff Abugov, and preparing to launch a new podcast called Saving Planet Us. And again, I've known Arya for many years. We've known online. Actually, interestingly, this is the first time we met in person. So we've been working together for many years on HPAC, and it's been quite a trip, quite a road so far, and we hope it will go further, much further. And finally, I will introduce my my co-founder here, Herb Simmons. Where is your bio, Herb? Here he is. Who many years ago, and now it seems many years, 4 years ago, Herb, it's 2021, we founded the Healthy Planet Action Coalition together with Suzanne Reed, who is now an emeritus founder. Maybe, I don't know, Herb is in New York somewhere, but I think, or are you back in Washington, I guess? So anyway, Herb Sim, he had there was another climate panel, New York Climate Week panel that Herb co-hosted with this is senioritis on steroids.
Sumitra Das.
Yeah, Sumitra Das. So that is also, talking about dealing with the same topic, the need for some climate intervention that we will be talking about. Herb Simmons is a longtime climate leader who co-led the effort that resulted in Montgomery County, Maryland, declaring the first climate emergency in the United States in 2017. He is the author of A Climate Vocabulary for the Future, which has been called a science poem, an inspiration and a prophecy by the noted author Kim Stanley Robinson. He is a co-founder of Healthy Planet Action Coalition, an international group committed to restoring a safe and healthy climate. He has helped organize and moderate panels on restoring a safe climate at the London Climate Week, the Washington, D.C. Climate Week, and the New York Climate Week. Additionally, he serves as the host of the Climate Emergency Forum YouTube channel, and he has degrees from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. So it's been a pleasure to work with Herb, and I'm so happy that he is able to join us for this event. So why don't we start with Bill and Ari and Herb, our first panel, 10 minutes each. They will just run from one to the other, and then we'll stop for 20 minutes for questions from both our online and in-person audience. So thank you.
Hi, I really primarily here just to welcome everybody. I am one of the members of Brooklyn Ethical, where we're sitting today. Brooklyn Ethical is a chapter of a network of institutions that are all part of what's called the American Ethical Union. We're a non-theistic congregation that is striving to create a better world, and we are a community of people who are really focusing on the same goals that the Healthy Planet Action Coalition is working on, which is to create a just and livable planet for all of us. We're hosting a range of climate content during this month. We recently had a talk about the larger question of how to think about using love and compassion in the way that we're advocating for a healthy planet. And on Sunday, we're going to be having a discussion about that platform that we hosted, and another platform that we hosted around Greco-Roman philosophy and how it can give us ideas on how to act in a world that is going through such a stark breakdown. And then a week later, we're going to be hosting famed activist lawyer Stephen Donziger here on Sunday, October 5th at 12:30. And the goal for this is really to continue this conversation about how we can create a community around the very principles that this scientific question calls for. It's not enough to know that we need to fix the climate. It's also how do we do it? How do we get people wanting to do this? And part of that is creating communities that are based around values. Churches and non-theistic churches like this one are how we do it. So we're really happy to host everyone here. We're grateful that you selected us for this, and we really hope that something good comes out of it. Thank you.
Bill, I wanted to offer you a contribution from the Healthy Planet Action Coalition to the Brooklyn Society for hosting us. Thank you very much.
We did a big check.
It's a small token of our appreciation for offering us this space and help in doing this.
And if anyone else wants to contribute, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And there's a donate link on our website, bsec.org. So if you're online, you can navigate to that and make a donation. All donations are welcome, and they go towards creating community that brings these values into the world. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. Shall I dig in?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Yeah.
So thank you so much, everybody. I just want to start by acknowledging that we are all here for the same reasons. We're here together at Climate Week because we all care passionately about creating a safe climate and a safe planet for generations to come. But this is not just about generations to come. This is about all of us. And I remember back in 2015, when I first heard that the Paris Climate Accord had finally passed, I was out walking in an unseasonably warm day in Jersey City, and when I saw the news, I started bawling. I was so relieved because I believed that this was going to be a turning point that we all desperately needed to restore a safe climate for our children and most personally for my own daughter, Phoenix. Nearly 200 countries had gathered to pass this historic legislation. It was meant to help preserve that future. The Paris Climate Accord wasn't perfect. It was a great achievement, however, because it finally got the world to unite around some very specific goals, and it also laid out a strategy with which to achieve them. I don't want to talk a lot about numbers, but we do need to understand certain numbers to properly understand how we can truly get to that safe climate that so many of us care so deeply about. Back in 1988, when James Hansen first testified before Congress that carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels was trapping heat in the atmosphere, he identified that 350 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was a point that we should not cross if we wanted to keep a safe and stable climate. But by the time the Paris Climate Accord was finally signed, we were already past that goal at 400 parts per million. And since that agreement, carbon dioxide has passed 426 parts per million in the atmosphere. But a number that is far more important in my mind, yet is much less known, is that if you include other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we have actually passed 524 parts per million equivalent. The other numbers we need to understand are the temperature goals that were laid out by the Paris Climate Accord. Paris said that we must keep temperatures well below 2 degrees Celsius warming, and that they would try not to cross a 1.5 Celsius warming limit. How would we do this? By transitioning to renewable energy, with each country setting their own targets to cut greenhouse gas pollution to net zero emissions by 2050. The idea was that we would remain under those warming limits up until the year 2050, and that once we finally reached zero greenhouse gas pollution, Earth's natural carbon sinks would help draw down those greenhouse gases so that temperatures would eventually reduce back down to safe levels. This all sounded like a very viable strategy at the time, even though some warned that that strategy also came with certain risks. But just last year, in 2024, we already crossed that 1.5 degrees Celsius warming limit. Unfortunately, many people don't know this because well-published numbers average yearly temperatures with the previous 30 years. The problem, or let's say the previous 29 years, 30-year global average. So the problem with relying on a 30-year average temperature is that warming is not linear, it is exponential. And our ecosystems respond to current temperature rise, not the temperature rise over a 30-year global average. Crossing these temperature limits wasn't an arbitrary suggestion. And we cannot guarantee what the consequences will be, even within the next several years, if we continue to rise at the current rate. So between ocean warming and acidification, loss of coral reefs, sea ice melt, disruption of ocean circulation, loss of tree cover, desertification, floods, hurricanes, loss of biodiversity, and more, many of our weather systems and our ecosystems are already on the critical list, and we are far closer to reaching a point of no return on climate than many realize. Because warming leads to more warming. We need to be honest about where we are at. The Paris Climate Accord has failed. And we have to admit that failure so that we can create a new strategy capable of dealing with our current reality and capable of dealing with it in time. And the clock is ticking. And that means we must address all of the reasons for increased warming. So did you know that the planet has been darkening simultaneously as it has been warming? And as the planet darkens, it continues to attract even more heat. This is one of the reasons why our poles are now warming 3 to 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. Because as ice melts, our oceans darken. Another reason that a warming planet adds even more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Droughts and heat create more forest fires, releasing more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and reducing Earth's capacity to draw down carbon dioxide. But most urgently, melting permafrost releases methane, a greenhouse gas over 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And according to James Hansen's most recent paper, now our planet is likely releasing more greenhouse gases than humans are. Plus, planetary darkening is amplifying warming much more than previously anticipated. So we have already lost too many species, too many of Earth's ecosystems, are already on the critically endangered list. So we simply cannot afford to be overly optimistic about what it is going to take to turn the situation around. Many of the people who are sharing this platform with me tonight have been dedicating their lives without pay to research and to advocate for a new strategy, a more holistic strategy towards a new goal. A strategy capable of restoring a safe climate of well below 1 degree Celsius post-industrial warming, to help protect and restore ecosystems that are now perilously close to tipping beyond the point of no return. But I want to be clear, we are not here tonight for a story of doom and gloom. We are here for a story of hope. But it cannot be a story of false hope. We must base our strategy on real science, real solutions, and real hope, based on our current reality. This is for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren, and on down the line. But we have to be realistic about what's going to take to restore a safe climate before we pass that point of no return. And the truth is that many of the scientists I know are adamant that net zero by 2050 and even net zero by 2035 just isn't going to get us there. We also have to draw down legacy greenhouse gases, and that means we need to focus on a net negative goal. But in order to do that, we must also restore nature's capacity to draw down carbon dioxide, because we have lost much of that capacity because of current warming. That means regenerating our ecosystems through nature-based strategies, while also brightening and cooling the planet to help reduce emissions and restore those capacities. Because there are lives being lost today. Ecosystems are being lost today. Communities are being devastated by fire and floods and sea level rise today. And the longer we allow the exponential warming to continue, the harder it will be to recover from. We must not allow for a net neutral strategy to perpetuate greenwashing. And we also must not allow for a strategy based on what I call wish-washing to keep us from achieving that goal either. The stakes are too great, and there are far too many lives at stake if we don't get this right. But we have to be honest about the state of our climate today, not 10 years ago. This is so that we can support a strategy truly capable of restoring a safe planet for generations to come. A strategy that addresses all the causes of warming so we can restore safe greenhouse gas levels and a safe climate so that our children and grandchildren will have a safer planet. We need to address all the ways that warming leads to more warming. We need a holistic strategy for restoring a safe climate, one based on cool, reduce, and remove, what Healthy Planet Action Coalition calls the Climate Triad. And we must begin with implementing the safest and most effective strategies possible first. For instance, painting rooftops white helps reduce energy consumption by 20%, while also helping to brighten and cool cities. And even planting trees, especially lighter varieties, can be particularly impactful for brightening the planet and also drawing down carbon dioxide at the same time. But we need to be able to consider and seriously study all of the strategies available to us, utilizing a risk assessment in the process. Because whatever we decide to do, we have to be able to consider what are the risks of not doing enough now to restore a safe climate while we still have a chance to help preserve that future for our children, the future that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Aria. Yes, that was that was an excellent presentation. And now let us move on to Herb.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ron. And hard to go after Arya, a hard act to follow. I think what I'm going to say complements what Arya said so eloquently. As you pointed out, Ron, I had the privilege of moderating a climate panel on nature-based climate intervention on Monday that Arya attended. And Jake Schwartz, who was on the panel tonight, helped organize another wonderful climate intervention panel on solar geoengineering research on Wednesday that I attended. That was outdoors, 2 stories above 34th Street at rush hour. So other than the fact that we heard sirens every 30 seconds, it was an invigorating setting. So anyway, with that as background, well, we know, I mean, a lot of what I'm going to say, you may know, or you've heard it now from Arya. Humanity is rapidly losing its campaign to address the climate crisis. Of that, there is or should be no dispute. Actually, there is a dispute, but there shouldn't be. What is in dispute definitely is why it's happening and what to do about it. So I'm going to present in the 7 or 8 minutes I've left a brief argument for what I believe and what HPAC, I believe, believes that we must do to reduce the almost unthinkable yet inevitable catastrophic future in store for virtually every life form on the planet. A primary reason for our collective failure is that climate leaders, scientists, and activists alike have conceptualized the climate problem much too narrowly with disastrous consequences. For the past 30 years, the world has addressed the climate crisis as if all we have is a hammer, and therefore, that, as the old cliche goes, everything looks like a nail. The hammer, of course, is emission reductions, and that's been the focus of thousands of climate meetings and trillions of dollars and millions of people. And yet, as we know, emissions continue to stubbornly refuse to significantly decline, if at all. There are 2 scientifically indisputable facts that, in my experience, are rarely articulated by climate advocates, though it was mentioned in an interesting article that David Keith and Zeke Housefather wrote in the New York Times this past Sunday that I would encourage people to read. First is that the temperatures and accelerating impacts we are experiencing and will experience with greater ferocity they're not from our current emission reductions, but rather they're from the accumulated or legacy greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, primarily but not exclusively carbon dioxide. It is the stock of these gases, or metaphorically, the size of the thickness of the blanket above us, that accounts for the climate breakdown we see every day, and not what we emit every day. That adds a minuscule amount, at least in the short term. Therefore, focusing on emission reductions cannot, by definition, reduce already much too catastrophically high temperatures, i.e. reducing the thickness of the blanket that's suffocating us. It can only reduce the increase in temperatures, as it does not address the stock of CO2 in the atmosphere. Second, even if the world is successful in the coming decades in eliminating excess greenhouse gas emissions, a gargantuan and unprecedented task that we are further away from today than we were 30 years ago, because of the lengthy time, literally thousands of years or more, that carbon dioxide remains in the atmosphere, the temperatures at the time we achieve net zero will be sharply higher than they are today, while sea level rise will continue unabated and ecosystems will continue to collapse. And if that's not bad enough for a Friday night, largely irreversible, catastrophic, linked critical tipping elements such as the Amazon, the AMOC circulation in the North Atlantic, coral reefs, and more will almost certainly be activated with consequences that only the most vivid and horrifying disaster movies could accurately portray. And this dystopian existence, if it could even be called an existence, will literally last for centuries. And if that's not bad enough, we also have a true ecological emergency, every bit as devastating and threatening to the existence of life as the climate crisis. I have dubbed what's happening there a biotic genocide of species. We need every tool in the ecological toolbox as well, and many of these tools can reinforce action with regard to climate, which is why I often call the situation we're in the bioclimatic emergency or the bioclimatic crisis. We've even had to invent a new vocabulary to describe some of these phenomena. Marine heat waves, flash droughts, atmospheric rivers, drunken trees, sunny day flooding, clear air turbulence, derechos, methane craters, ice quakes, and furnace winds, to name a few. Reaching net zero, again, it's important to say this, will not result in any appreciable or discernible improvement in the climate we experience then, and the impacts that occur for literally centuries, if not millennia, absent large-scale removal of the excess CO2 and methane in the atmosphere. That's really important, and if I said nothing else, if I repeated that 3 times, which isn't to say we shouldn't do it, we shouldn't bust our rears to do everything we can, but we cannot rely upon that as the sole remedy, as the hammer and the nail. And yet that's the current climate strategy. So with that, a small number of people and institutions, but growing rapidly, but still quite tiny, are calling for the whole toolbox to be taken out of the garage and urgently employed to repair our climate. And what the toolbox includes are, of course, emission reductions and scaling up all possible approaches to removing CO2 and methane, as daunting as a task as that may be. Some have calculated that removing all the excess CO2 is equivalent to recreating the entire infrastructure of the fossil fuel industry. But it's something we probably have to do if we're going to restore a safe climate. Some of these approaches that have great promise, including accelerating the weathering of rocks, directly capturing CO2 from the air with machines, methods of methane oxidation, and a wide variety of approaches to restore our ecosystems, which not only remove CO2, but directly cool the climate. Thirdly, and perhaps most urgently, we need to safely and effectively, and safety and effectiveness is a central principle of the Healthy Planet Coalition mission statement, deploy what we call direct climate cooling through a range of approaches that can largely, through sunshine reflection, ecosystem restoration, and other means, begin to stabilize and ultimately reduce the temperatures by reflecting some of the heat back away or keeping it out of there to begin with. These approaches have been written about and tested through various computer simulations, in some cases for many years, and have not been found, at least on the computer and in theory, to have any fatal flaws. But they urgently need to be let out into the wild so they can be field tested and, if appropriate, scaled up in the real world. These techniques include stratospheric aerosol injection, marine cloud brightening, thinning cirrus clouds, and other approaches that I think Ron will speak about. Together, emission reductions, carbon removal, and direct cooling of the climate, which we call the Climate Triad, are essential, urgent, and must be done safely and effectively in a coordinated and integrated fashion by the world community based upon the best science and technology. They must be evaluated, tested, monitored with robust participation, particularly by those countries, individuals, and groups that are most affected by the climate crisis and are often the least influential in world politics, the global south and many other less advanced people and regions in the global north. It is a matter of both spatial and intergenerational equity, as our generation has preempted the future of every subsequent generation to be born on this planet, as well as every generation of all other life forms, except perhaps for jellyfish and cockroaches and their brethren. And it must be done urgently because of what some have called the procrastination penalty, that each day we wait, and we sure have been waiting, the problem gets steeper as the climate snowballs, or perhaps we should say fireballs, are beginning to tip over at the top of the mountain. And if we don't stop them soon, it'll be too fast and out of control. We also need to dramatically scale up in quality and quantity what I call dynamic adaptation, adaptation that self-adapts like a good surfer to the increasingly unpredictable and intensive climate waves coming our way, to minimize the suffering and also to provide enough of a stable civilization to meet our climate and ecological goals. Critics of direct climate cooling, and they are everywhere, many even demanding the end to research, much less deployment, often portray cooling as presenting impossible to estimate risks, immense shocks if prematurely terminated, the risks of direct cooling taking attention away from emission reductions, and perhaps the most challenging and vexing question of them all, by how, when, and by whom will we govern the research, deployment, development, and monitoring of direct climate cooling, along with the other pillars of the climate triad. These obstacles and criticisms of cooling must not be dismissed, ridiculed, or minimized. They are very real. But in a world where only, and I repeat, in my judgment at least, only directly cooling the climate has the potential to stabilize and lower temperatures in years rather than in many decades, and at a cost that is little more than a rounding error in global GDP, these criticisms and obstacles must and should not be seen as reasons to prevent, stop, or slow the one approach that could conceivably save humanity and the natural world, but instead they should be seen as legitimate challenges that our best minds and our finest institutions need to urgently focus on. From a human rights perspective, what right do the current inhabitants, do we have, to prevent deployment of a means that can likely guarantee a safer and healthier climate than would otherwise exist? So that's the recipe. Let's get out the toolbox and let's demand that our policymakers dig deep into the toolbox so that these four tools, emission reductions, large-scale greenhouse gas removal, direct climate cooling, and dynamic adaptation, can urgently become the basis for an international climate restoration plan to bring temperatures back to, as the HPAC mission statement indicates, well below 1 degree C in the coming decades there. And so we have a couple of decades, or what I call a one-generational challenge, to restore the magnificent planet that we all call home. I ask you to talk to your friends, your family, and your colleagues, and urge them to join this one-generational challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Herb. Thank you. That was another excellent presentation. Needless to say, I completely agree with. Let us now just open the floor up for questions. We have maybe about 10 minutes or 20 minutes for questions, and after which we will break and then convene another panel. Anybody have questions or comments from the on-site? So let me try to. I think let me first see if there's anybody.
We have someone raise their hand right here.
Yeah. I think
we're going to have people in the
go
room
ahead.
use the mic.
Yeah.
I'll have a question
Okay,
too, but I'll
yeah.
let a guest do this first.
Yeah, thank you very much, Captain Hugh Hendrickson, the CEO and founder of Positive Polar. And I will, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I think this is a great initiative, and glad that we are all together here. I have been here from the New York Climate Week, have listened a lot, but I have a kind of a question that we can complement. But the issue is that seems to be that we are not winning this issue. Specifically in the USA, we have just heard 2 days ago that there was a climate denial. And it seems to be that the common people don't understand this. And the common people is the one that vote. And finally, the politics follow their voters, right? People that vote. So, and this climate denial issue is not slowing down, it's growing really. And it's not only in the US, it's now growing into other countries. So it's an open question for whoever wants to answer, and then maybe I can then complement. What are we going to change into our strategy? Because, as I said, it seems to be that we are not winning, and I come from also the defense industry, and there are some countries that are seeing this as something positive. For example, for sailing into the Arctic and take resources from the Arctic and then to Antarctica. So what are we going to do? It's an open question. And then I can complement if you want. Thank you.
Can I address that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So first of all, I mean, you're speaking to the exact issue that I am currently most focused on, is we really need to amplify education, and there are many ways to amplify education. As you know, I'm developing a TV series called Revolution Earth, looking forward to getting that in the market. And I think it would make a huge difference, because we can use storytelling to engage people to the scope and scale of the issue that we are dealing with, but in a way that's entertaining and more accessible. Because a lot of the problem is that when we are we're focused on scientific talk, like this panel here. I think it's very hard for people to understand. You know, people really get moved by emotional conversations, and using simplistic language that helps really drive at the heart of the issue. I mean, one of the reasons why the other side has made so much progress is, for one thing, they understood the importance of using messaging to influence people. And I think the reason why they understood the importance of that is because they didn't really have the truth on their side. So if you don't have the truth on your side, you know you need to infiltrate the media to help influence the public. But when you have the truth on your side, sometimes you think the truth is going to be enough and people will just get it. And so there has been a large-scale, well-funded effort on the other side, funded by corporate interests, that has infiltrated the media on multiple levels. There have been documentaries created about the subject. The Brainwashing of My Dad, my friend Jen Senko produced this documentary that is absolutely brilliant, that addresses this issue and really reveals why it is that we are in the state we're in right now. And there are currently efforts to help unite people and bridge that divide. Saving Planet Us, the podcast I'm working on right now, looking forward to launch, is focused on exactly that, having more conversations that can help expose the influence of corporations to influence politicians and governments to do their bidding. And I will say also, I'm going to give a shout out to some people who I know who are working on this issue. I had a meeting with David Fenton yesterday, who is absolutely brilliant. He's been working on media strategy and public relations for a really long time. And I know he's working on an endeavor with Catherine Hayhoe. And they need funding. They need money to be focused on reaching out to the public to help educate and engage the public in a way that the public will understand and be moved by, while focusing on what the public can do and how they can engage. So I know that through HPAC, we're working on that. We've got various strategies that I know we will be working on implementing. And we need funding to be able to be more effective at that. Unfortunately, I think the bottom line is that you've got a lot of people who have a lot of money because they've been making money using the fossil fuel infrastructure, and that has empowered them to put a lot of money into messaging, to influence politicians, and to keep us from doing the right thing. And what I am hoping is that what happened the other day will help bring this issue to the forefront, because I do not want the United States to be a laughingstock. And sometimes things have to get really bad before they get better. And so what I'm hoping is that the roots of that corruption is in the process of being exposed. And once it reaches the light of day, that's when we can really empower what I like to think of as an environmental revolution that has the power to save the world. So we just gotta keep going.
Are you referring to the UN?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah.
Okay, we have one person.
Can I respond?
But go ahead. Let's.
Yeah, I guess,
Herb
I
wants
mean,
to-
look, we don't know what works and what doesn't work. And so the more people are out there doing things that they think work, and particularly if they test them and evaluate them to see what impact they're having, the better. So let me state that as the sort of first principle. But I am very skeptical that bottoms up stuff at this point will make or will likely make much of a difference. And I say that as the host of a YouTube channel that has probably since I started with them 7 or 8 months ago has probably gotten, I don't know, over 200,000 views. And every week we focus on another aspect of the climate emergency and we urge action. So, I'm certainly not critical of that, or I wouldn't be doing it myself. But that said, I think we need to be much more strategic. And if I had the resources and the time and the energy, I would like to see a small coalition of people try to identify those leaders that are charismatic, whether they be at universities or civic institutions or in government, et cetera, who have a platform. And basically what we need leadership that is articulate and trustworthy that can influence people. Because, again, as Arias said, had this, the guy that's running our country right now says the most outrageous things, but he's charismatic and he makes an impact. And the Democrats have been so spineless when it comes to climate. I mean, that's a little off the subject, not really off. It's one part of it. You had Harris that hardly talked about it at all and changed her position in support of fracking, and look where it got her. You had Hillary Clinton, who barely mentioned it. You can't, people are afraid of this issue because some pollster tells them it doesn't poll well. The answer should be, well, I'm going to go out there and convince people to be for it by, as Arias said, by showing them the facts and by packaging it in such a way that it strikes home to them. So anyway, that's my perspective on that, if and until we find some charismatic leaders, not just in this country, but around the world, no disrespect to people like Bill McKibben, who's been, amazing for years, but he's not a natural born leader. I mean, or Greta, who's, sort of disappeared, et cetera. So anyway, that's my perspective.
Okay, thank you.
We have a number of questions. We have a number of people
I'd be happy
with
for
hands up.
more questions.
Okay.
So I'll go next, and then I know there's more people.
There's one person on just so you
Okay,
know.
so there's a question I want to ask, which is a different lens of the science, which includes economics. And I heard someone who had a specialty in heterodox economics, and I heard someone had a background with U.S. Sustainable Business Council, and also was an advisor to Kim Stanley Robinson, who wrote some amazing speculative fiction that touches on this. So leaning into those different sources, but also donut economics with Kate, whose last name I'm not remembering right now. Whelan? Kate? So,
Rayworth.
Thank you, Rayworth. The donut economics asks us to think about something that the gentleman online asked. He said, but we have to think about how, when, and by whom we'll do this, which you're talking to leadership or grassroots debate, which please, it has to be grassroots because that's all that's going to be left after every catastrophe. It's us, and the leadership is failing. So how do we think about a different way economically to make this work, or to make any solution work that looks differently at the resources it takes? Because we're really asking the fossil fuel industry to fund this. No. but several generations, there won't be much of anything left. So how do we think about living into the future using a donut economics approach?
Well, I'm not on the panel, but this is a very good question. So I will attempt some kind of response. I believe that I agree with my fellow, heterodox economists that, and many of the younger climate activists, that it will be very difficult to make a transition to a green economy, to a sustainable economy, and an economy with a sustainable natural footprint within the current system. I agree with that. It really does have to fundamentally change. However,
Being capitalism, just for listeners to know.
Yeah, capitalism just doesn't work, especially with this kind of a global crisis, because it's very much based on individual incentives, and you need a policy in order. You need in fact global policy to make this work. But the problem is that the climate crisis is moving so fast. The natural system that we are part of is not going to wait for us humans to get our act together. And we typically get our act together very slowly. If you look at the course of human social and political evolution, especially, it takes a long time. And there's all these reversals, and you go forward. I mean, over the long arc of history, as someone we all know was famous for saying, we have moral progress, but it's a long arc. So that's what we are talking about here, I think, is that we need something to help us, to give us time to do the things we need to do. And so, we have to work within the existing system for the near, coming decades. And in particular, we need a Band-Aid. We need some kind of a way to keep things from spinning out of control and cool the planet as we try to get our act together. So it's I know it's anyway. That's my answer to that, and that's why, in fact, I switched from I was for many years I said climate is something that the capitalists are going to solve. Everybody wants to nobody wants to have a climate disaster. I mean, that doesn't help anybody. Everybody should be worried about their grandkids.
Home Depot shows great growth in their business.
What's that?
Home Depot, for example, shows great growth in their business after every climate catastrophe. All the building industry shows growth. It's
Oh yeah. No, I know. But I figured out fairly late in my career that this is in fact inextricably the fundamental change part of this, which is something we do have to do. That is the way to actually solve this. Is going to be very difficult, and is going to require some social and political economic adjustments, changes. I do believe that, but anyway, that's my long answer. Does anybody else want to?
Briefest 2 cents to add to this.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Kaishi. So I've been able to, in my recent career, create opportunities. I've been able to create opportunities to educate youth activists around donut economics. I'm very passionate about degrowth. A degrowth paper that I've read states that if we take a needs-based approach to fulfilling the needs of people, we would be able to not exceed our natural resource allotment. In fact, we would only take up to 30% of our actual allotment. So I think we need a way of bringing people together and co-design for policy, actually flatten society as much as we can in small instances of workshops, which I have done in the past, but need the opportunity to do more so. And globally, we need a global movement of bringing people like us in the rooms where people make these decisions. So that's just my 2 cents.
There was someone in the room on Zoom?
Yeah.
Yeah, let Ari.
Yeah, I would like to address that, but also address the previous question and kind of pull them together. So first of all, I mean, I'm all with you in terms of, there may be people who don't believe in bottom up, but I think we can't do it without bottom up. In fact, I think that there are way too many people who honestly intellectually understand where we're at. They understand what's at stake, but they're not willing to step forward because they're afraid of the backlash, because they don't think they're going to be getting enough support from the population if they come forth and speak the truth about where we are at with the climate and what we need to do in order to solve the situation. So I think we absolutely need to be appealing to the public. But in terms of the economics that you're addressing, and let's say, for instance, the American Sustainable Business Council, one of the things I love is the whole concept of conscious capitalism, conscious consumerism. And that also includes educating people, having them understand what's at stake, and then making more decisions about where they shop, what companies they choose to support based on what those companies are doing, how they're doing business. And there are also businesses who have really frigging brilliant economic models that can be supporting the triad. For instance, like Hugo Henriksen, who happens to be right here in the audience with Positive Polar, has a brilliant startup that is focused on taking an eco cruise ship company and restoring biodiversity in the ocean by using biomimicry to recreate whale poop along whale highways, so that we can be sequestering carbon, reducing ocean acidification, while people are out having an amazing time learning about science, and then taking what they learn back to the people that they know in their own communities and spreading the knowledge and being lit up by what's possible. And then when they buy tickets, they're actually supporting the science, which I think is absolutely brilliant. And they have also talked about integrating another strategy, a solar radiation modification strategy of marine cloud brightening into the strategy. Basically just taking salt water, ocean water, spraying it up into the clouds, increasing the reflectivity of those clouds, and helping to cool the planet, by pulling heat back out into the atmosphere. So it's a brilliant business that can be supporting the triad in an economically viable way. So there are a lot of different companies that can be finding innovative ways to integrate more sustainable technologies. And the more we educate the population about that, the more we can support a conscious consumer culture.
You have a few people in the room and someone back there.
I don't mean to say that capitalism will not, that what we had for a long time was a mixed economy, and that worked quite well for the post-war period. And that disappeared, basically, because of various factors, of huge inequality in wealth and power, and we're seeing the results. So we need to get back to something like that. And in fact, if we were honest, we would need a war economy right now. We would need, we have an enemy that's much greater than any other enemy humanity has ever faced. And if we were going to do this quickly, we would need that kind of very rapid transition that is you need coordination for that. You need a large a global effort to make that work. So I don't it's absolutely true that there are many efforts and many people are doing great work in trying to drive this forward. But anyway, I'll stop. Can I just ask this one guy, there's a person online who's been waiting for a long time.
Yes, that would be Gregory, I think is
Greg,
online.
yeah. Greg, did you want to?
We have a few more people with hands up.
Yeah.
I'm here. Thanks. Thank you for the presentations. I agree with a lot of what everybody said. I would say that in terms of the sticking point with people, of course we have climate deniers, and we have a climate denier in chief as president of the United States right now. But it has to be admitted that, as far as I know, essentially the entire climate community, scientific climate community, and most of the entire scientific community as a whole is still either against even the testing at this point in the open air testing, or indifferent to it. So that's a huge problem, because the few high-profile scientists that communicate to the public effectively are virtually all against it, and that has been the case for many years. And then, of course, Al Gore is against it fairly adamantly, and he's probably the biggest communicator regarding the climate problem. And I've admired Al Gore since he came out with his Inconvenient Truth, but he's in the way now, and he's on the wrong side of the issue. So there's that, and that has to be faced. We have the petroleum companies and all these vested interests who are doing their best, but we have basically a full court press by the climate science community. So, and someone can correct me if that's wrong, but I think it's the case. Secondly, a second point I would make is that, for whatever set of reasons, I have my own theories, there's virtually no kids where 25-year-olds are not kids. I'm talking about 18-year-olds. The guys there's infinite number of kids in the climate activist movement. There's zero in the cooling movement, the climate cooling movement, except a handful of dudes in Finland or something, and they're kind of getting long in the tooth by now, but I mean, they're sort of adults by now. I mean, you just take a look at Greta Thunberg. She's used to be the climate activist in chief or whatever. She's repeatedly condemned, in particular SAI, which is sort of the bad guy of cooling methods, but she's never come out in favor of any of the more benign cooling methods, marine cloud brightening, ocean iron fertilization, et cetera, et cetera. So those are two big problems. There's no youth cooling movement. And to me, I have to say that I assume it's not romantic. It's engineering. It's like rolling up your sleeves and engineering something versus, pouring into the streets and waving signs and screaming. It's a lot more fun if you're 18. So those are the points I would make. I don't know exactly how to address those, but those are problems. So thank you for letting me speak about that.
Yeah, let's take. Do we have a couple more, and then we can take a break? Yeah.
So I'm going to say one thing that's really good news and very optimistic, and one thing that is very unpopular. I honestly believe that Greta and other environmentalists' focus on free Palestine is desperately hurting what we're trying to do here. I think these issues are together for some people, but very, very much not together for a lot of people. Secondly, the good news, I don't know how you guys feel about that. Secondly, I do think that Donald Trump's quote-unquote speech at the UN was one of the best things that could ever happen to the climate movement. Because we have a very important election in 2026, and the main reason, and you guys were talking about it, I think one of the main reasons that Kamala lost and Hillary lost was that they would not talk about climate. And I think the prevailing feeling amongst the non-voters, the young non-voters especially, is that there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans.
Right.
And what Donald Trump did was give us a gift to state in the clearest possible ways I have ever heard from a president of the United States that he does not believe in climate change. He believes it's a hoax. And even worse, two other things. Worse is that renewable energy is a hoax, which is just laughable, but becoming much more relevant with AI and the vast increase in our demand for electricity and electricity prices. So the good news ultimately, I think, will be economic, where every single bit of pain that people feel between now and November of 2026 with respect to electricity prices, for example, we need to point out that on a loop, that speech, those clips from that speech, that gift that he gave Democrats and environmentalists 2 days ago.
Yeah. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, if I could I
just,
comment?
really
Take
quickly.
these two questions and then.
Sure. I just wanted to address one thing. I mean, I know a lot of people in the group have expressed a lot of frustration with the fact that people are not coming out in favor of cooling. But I think that when we talk about cooling and cooling alone, what we're going to do is give more fuel to the fears that people have of cooling as being an excuse to continue emitting indefinitely while we continue to poison the planet with toxic fossil fuels. And that so I think that we have to understand where those people are coming from, and we need to address those issues. Why I like to focus on net negative emissions. Because if we focus on net negative, we are not giving license to people to continue emitting just because we're going to draw down those emissions. We have to stop emitting, we have to draw down emissions, and we have to cool right now to give ourselves enough time to restore safe conditions for the planet so that we can draw down those fossil fuels.
And that is the HPAC
exactly.
view that we need to talk about all three. So,
yes.
and I actually don't know of any cooling people that I know that are saying, just cooling, but the perception may be.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
Let's be careful.
Yeah.
At some point, could I speak?
All right. Hi, my name is Mike Ewall with the Energy Justice Network. I was actually just doing a workshop of my own yesterday in Brooklyn on false solutions to climate change, and so I feel like I'm stepping in to them here. I heard a comment about there being skepticism of bottom-up organizing, and let me just first speak to that. In our work at Energy Justice Network, we've helped communities across the country defeat hundreds of proposals for coal-fired power plants, gas-fired power plants, biomass and waste incinerators that are actually worse for the climate than coal, even though they pretend they're not. And this was all done one community at a time. This was not NRDC, Sierra Club, and Greenpeace lobbying top-down to the federal government getting policies passed. None of that happened. This is one community at a time, decimating over half, in some cases up to 100%, in the case of trash incinerators, of industry proposals and entire waves of industrial development. So if you're going to talk to me about bottom-up versus top-down, we've got the track record to prove that bottom-up is far more effective as far as that goes. Thank you. So that was just a reactionary point to what I heard, but I want to get to my main reactions here or points. So I didn't hear anything about, well, first of all, of course, we agree on reducing emissions. Yes, we're on the same page on that. I didn't hear anything about animal agriculture and the fact that that is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, more than energy sectors, but we're afraid as a movement to talk to people about what they eat and the need to have a plant-based diet. I didn't hear anything about nuclear, which is probably good because it's a big false solution I spent a lot of time on in my workshop because a lot of my participants wanted to learn about that as why that's not an answer. I'm curious to know where you stand on that. But I came to this because I saw in the description that seemed to be all about geoengineering. I haven't heard that word used yet, but all the things you're talking about are basically geoengineering, direct air capture, these marine systems, the stuff you want to spray into the atmosphere and whatnot. And I've also been at workshops this past week, particularly on marine geoengineering and the problems with that, and how they brought up the notion of free prior and informed consent, which sitting in an ethical society building, I think is especially pertinent. And the fact that a lot of these experiments that have started to happen around the world are not being done with people's free, prior, or informed consent. And so to have people in here talk about, oh, we should just start spraying stuff into the air, and all these climate scientists and Al Gore and these young people either don't care or don't like it. Well, maybe they have good reasons for that. And we're not talking about that here. We're just assuming there's a very condescending and dismissive attitude I'm hearing here, particularly toward young people, and particularly toward their views on other issues like Palestine, that have a lot to do with why Kamala Harris didn't get elected, for example. So I would just like to hear more about what specific proposals. I mean, you're hearing we're going to put whale poop in the ocean, but I don't know, are we actually talking about human poop from cruise ships we're going to start dumping in the ocean, and even though that's been banned? And is that one of our geoengineering solutions? Like, let's get specific about what we're talking about, and let's hear the critiques and what you know about your opponents' critiques on it, so we can hear it back and forth and understand why there's a lot of skepticism around these proposals, because I think a lot of it is very well warranted.
Yeah, no.
Could I respond to that?
Go ahead, Herb. Yeah.
Yeah. First, Mike, I think I know you casually. You're working on the Dickerson plant in Montgomery County, that issue, and some of the issues about 10 years ago when we were doing the climate emergency with Jim Driscoll and others. And I have a lot of respect for your work. I don't know if we've ever met personally. So I guess at least I can only speak for what I said. And I hope I was clear enough to say that the critics of geoengineering, so yes, we can call that, there's at least a dozen different terms for what we're talking about. Unfortunately, geoengineering is I guess the most commonly used one. And I did say that the critics deserve to be heard, and people in the globe, both the least advantaged in the global north and the global south, need to have a full voice in these decisions. So I reject any presumption, at least for anything I said, that it's meant to exclude people or groups, particularly those with less political power. That said, as Ron has said, the dilemma that we have seen, and it's based on science, and it can be disputed, is that we're damn out of time. And there are, I was in the Global Climate Tipping Points Conference in Exeter this summer, and there are 16 tipping points, a number of which have either may have already been activated or could well be activated before we get to 2 degrees centigrade, that may be irreversible and make almost everything else we do moot. If the AMOC goes, if the Amazon goes, then all the citizen participation and all the local stuff will mean almost nothing. So that doesn't mean I don't have enormous respect for the organizing work that you're doing and your colleagues are doing and so many other folks around the world are doing. What we're saying is that, and I'm saying this, but I think my panelists will agree, or if not, they'll say so, is that most people at least don't know that emission reductions, as I said, no matter how aggressive they are, cannot lower temperatures that are already too high. They can only increase or reduce the increase in temperatures that are likely to basically result in a unlivable planet for centuries. And I think that's the message that at least I almost never hear from mainstream climate folks. And I think it's a critical one. And I think, and I could be wrong, to the degree to which people hear that message, they may be a little more open-minded towards some of the things we're proposing. And the last thing I'll say is, at least as far as HPAC, while we're doing an analysis of some of the strengths and weaknesses of each one of these, I mean, our mission is to have the world community, through an equitable and science-based process, look at the role of emission reductions, of cooling or geoengineering, and carbon dioxide removal and adaptation, and figure out, with full participation from all communities, the best approach to stabilize temperatures and ensure a livable climate. That's what we're doing. And obviously what, you and I, and I'm sure others here, could have fruitful discussions for a long time on this. So I'll wrap up my comments with that. But I don't, at least for me, don't get me wrong, I have enormous respect for you and your work, Mike, and those of your colleagues.
Okay, thank you, Herb. Thank you. We're just about
Can I
ready for
add
the
just a
break.
little something?
Let's have one more question, Arya. Yeah.
I am Lauren. And I just want to say that, like, polluting the atmosphere, putting all these CFCs into the atmosphere. I mean, I've heard Leonardo DiCaprio's campaign, as well as other people speak about this, famous people, and they were speaking about the UN, and they brought it to the assembly line, and they said that, you know, wars create bigger and bigger disasters. We have to stop these wars that are creating craters in our atmosphere. We've seen it in the cornfields, we've seen it in the valleys, in the streams, we've seen it in the atmospheres. They've seen it in every country you can imagine. It's just been horrific. And, you know, and political upheaval and violence doesn't help that. That only makes it worse. And that's what we're dealing with right now. And the only way to stop that is to get voices and activists out there that want to take it down a notch. They want to break it up. So how do we do that? We silence the far right, and we give more voices to the left. As bad as it is, as extreme as they may seem, you have to start there, because you see those countries are coming together and doing those types of projects. You know, if you look at, for example, Puerto Rico encountered one of the worst disasters in the field, and they're about to encounter another one, as well as the other South American countries. And just doing nothing but attacking those ships that were coming out. You know, scientists, we don't know what was on them, who was on the ships, and what they were seeking. They were obviously seeking asylum. That made our climate disaster worse, but in a way, it also made it better, because it showed narrative that we get one shot in government to keep the democratic system and to keep the oceans moving the way that they should be. And the way to do that is, like Kamala said, I was listening to a speech she said, is to hold the floor, hold the mic, and come up with a plan and give those doctors and those scientists a foot in the door by getting your like what California just did. He just put a big proposal out for 2028 climate disaster relief fund for and that's, he says they won't, it's just not a, this is, they'll never win. He said.
Yeah, I don't think I doubt that any of us are against stopping the genocide or stopping maybe there might be some, but these wars are horrible, and they are exacerbating the climate problem. No question. I think the issue is, it's how to do all of this, and how to do this particular one that we're talking about now most effectively, as we deal with many other things. I'm a founding member of DSA. I mean, I go back many years, and I was chair of Chicago. I mean, for many years. So I hear that voice. But anyway, I think Arya, you want to say a few comments, and then we'll just I think take a break, because it's been a pretty long discussion. A good one, though, and thank you for your comments. Yeah,
it's been a very good discussion, and I wanted to address what Mike was saying. One of the things that I think is frequently left out of the conversation when people are expressing their fears about the big concept of geoengineering, which I don't think you were here for my initial introduction. Oh, you did? Okay, because I mean, of course, painting rooftops white, that is a form of solar radiation management, so is tree planting, and they're all so is, all kinds of planting projects that actually help cool, but you seem to be very aware of that. But the other thing I wanted to address is just the risk assessment. We cannot fail to act urgently enough just because of the understandable fears that people have. And we need a global governance system, and we need to be able to carefully assess what the results are when something is done, so that we can, if there are unforeseen consequences, we can act in time and implement things at a very small scale, so that we have enough information and data to do that kind of global assessment of what's necessary. And I mean, I think Herb really addressed it very well in the urgency. You know, we are dealing with such an urgent situation. We just cannot afford to allow fear of taking action get in the way, so that it is too late for all of us to restore a safe climate, you know. But I really appreciate where you're coming from.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I think on those very, very, I think, you know, perceptive and important comments, I think we will break. And let's do like the 10 minutes or so, and we'll come back for our second panel. And then if we have time, we can convene both panels together. And but if we get more of these kind of good discussion going, we will have to adjust accordingly. Yes. Okay.
10 minutes from now.
Yeah. Let's reconvene. It's always hard to reconvene after we had quite a stimulating conversation. And okay, well, welcome back, everyone. And I would like now to introduce our second panel, which will be Rafe Pomerantz, Jake Schwartz, and Ron Bayman. Or actually, in the order will be Rafe Pomerantz, Ron Bayman, and Jake Schwartz. So let me introduce Rafe. Rafe has been a longtime climate leader, and he is actually, early on in HPAC, he was one of the really small number of well-known climate leaders, kind of a leader of mainstream climate groups who did speak to us and engage with us, and we were very, very happy to have Rafe join us in this cause. So Rafe Pomerantz brings decades of experience in government and nonprofit organizations to his climate policy work. He is a consultant with the nonprofit Rethink Energy Florida to raise awareness on the impact of sea level rise with the Upper Limit Project. Pomerantz is former chairman of Arctic 21, a network of organizations focused on communicating the unraveling of the Arctic. Pomerantz has previously served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Environment and Development, 1993 to 99, and Climate Negotiator, President of Friends of the Earth, Senior Associate for Climate Change and Ozone Depletion Policy at the World Resources Institute, and President of the Climate Policy Center. He was founder and chairman of the Board of American Rivers, as well as chairman of the board both of the League of Conservation Voters and of the Potomac Conservancy. Pomerantz has spent much of his career raising awareness of global warming and building support for climate solutions. His work plays a central role in Nathaniel Rich's New York Times Magazine article and subsequent book, Losing Earth. So that is Rafe. Then we will be followed by myself, who you already know about. And our final speaker will be Jake Schwartz, who is a climate activist and organizer who has worked on environmental campaigns across the country. Last year, he served as interim climate voters director for the Harris-Walz campaign, and he is currently the federal campaign manager at Chesapeake Climate Action Network, where he manages their coalition building and advocacy on solar geoengineering research. And the Chesapeake Climate Action Network is another very large mainstream climate group based up here in the Chesapeake in the Northeast that has recently become more supportive of looking at this this alternative that we are discussing right now, the geoengineering research. Okay, so without further ado, Rafe, are you ready to go?
I am. Can you hear me? You hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and it's good to be with you. I'm glad you're all, those of you in Brooklyn are in a great place. So I want to start this out with I'm going to do something I haven't done before with a poll. Okay. Can I get the photo I submitted up on the screen? I want to know how many people like this photo, don't like this photo, because there was a gentleman earlier who said Donald Trump's speech earlier this week set the stage for the next election. And it was his usual idiocy about climate change that did that. But it's all I'll tell you my theory is that this photo encompasses the whole thing. Boom. One photo. So can we put that up? And then we'll say, well, people can react to it. Don't like it, like it.
Okay, I'm putting it up right now. Let me see.
Good.
Oh, is it up? No.
No.
Well, hold on. Come on, Mr. Zoom. Hold on.
You see the photo?
I got it. What's that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There we go. Okay. Can people see that? Hold on. It's trying to get there. It's on my screen. There we go.
Now this photo here, this is an actual cover of the Daily News from Trump's first year when he dropped out of the Paris Accord. Okay, and you can see the subhead down there: pulls America out of historic climate pact, decides to hell with science and the Earth's future. And I just continue to try to say this photo has the whole ball game in it. Now, does anybody, if you want to disagree, say so, or agree? I don't know how to take a poll. What's the room feel like? Good? Bad?
I think it's an excellent photo.
Oh, you do? Well, that's what counts.
Yeah.
So I get the whole, okay. Thank you. That's all I need. I'll go on. We can take it down.
Okay, we'll take it down.
Makes one sick.
I think we're preaching to the converted here, Rafe.
Right, I understand that, but the question is whether the photo is useful in a campaign context or a PR context to convey what Trump stands for. That's the point. I know everybody there, so I'm speaking to the converted. All right, so the project I wanted to talk about here is one that is designed to drive climate policy. Okay? The theory of our group that's based in out of Rethink Energy, Florida, is that the single metric in the climate system of global temperature is insufficient to drive climate policy, and that we need a stronger incentive for governments to act. And it sort of emerged in Florida. Okay, how much sea level rise is too much in Florida? Why isn't the state all over this? Because sea level rise is going to take out the state. So this question we started with was, how much is too much? Well, we worked this over, and the problem becomes that sea level rise is inexorable, so to speak. It just keeps going for a long time because the amount of heat in the system already, and the amount of heat that's going to take out an awful lot of ice and increase thermal expansion of the ocean. So our project evolved to calling for the establishment of an upper limit to sea level rise. And we ended up defining the upper limit as the lowest possible rate of increase. Because as I say, if you try to absolutely stop it, your scientists will say that's not doesn't work. But what you can do is lower the rate. And when you look at the forecast or model results of sea level rise over the next decades and century, the amount of sea level rise diverges hugely depending on the emissions scenario, okay? Leaving aside all the questions of climate intervention for the moment. So what becomes apparent if you use that definition of sea level rise, of the goal, which is the lowest possible rate of increase, the lowest possible rate of increase essentially means zeroing out emissions. Because if you don't, the consequences of failure to address sea level rise, of course, become catastrophic around the world. And so we think that our theory is that sea level rise, an upper limit to sea level rise, can support the metric of 1.5 to 2 degrees. And that, but what the advantage of it is that it's an impact that everybody understands, or people understand a lot better. And obviously in the coastal world. So we've added a couple of elements to this definition, one of which, it's obvious it's a part of it, but we reiterate the need to stop the disintegration of the ice sheets. The word stop is an interesting one. Slow, bring it to a halt, but the world has to, the crisis in climate change, or one of them, is embedded in the fate of Greenland and the fate of Antarctica. And we now, and this will bring in the climate intervention world. I don't know if you all saw a recent paper by 4 prominent ice sheet scientists about how 1.5 degrees was simply too much to hold on to the ice sheets. That you had to bring the temperature down to 1 degree. Well, how are you going to do that? Sounds overwhelming, but the answer may rest in interventions. And who knows? I don't. But the astonishing thing about this paper was declaring that to hold on to Antarctica and Greenland, you had to drop global temperatures. I'm not sure the time scale involved there. There may be enough time in it to do that. And Iran, you just tell me when I've hit my time, okay?
Well, you have about 5 more minutes.
Okay. So we've been out with this idea. We've written op-eds. We have actually had a piece in Foreign Affairs on it with one of my colleagues. We're trying to now find the leadership, some political leadership, to carry this forward. And it would seem to me that the logic of it is that a politician from a coastal state could come out strongly for this idea. And what follows is a very powerful rationale for taking steps to eliminate emissions, because the fate of that particular state rests with accomplishing that. There are many interesting places that one recent discussion we had is that the next G20 meeting after this one, which is in Johannesburg, coming up, the G20 meeting will be in Miami at a Trump golf course. Exactly. So our one-liner for this is, we'll see if we can sell it, is you're hearing all these things in the formative stages, of course, is save Miami, save the world. And many of these G20 countries of course, have enormous urban areas that are coastal, vulnerable, and there will be great suffering as a result of sea level rise. So we're thinking about trying to turn the Miami G20, and we have plenty of time to do this, into a call for saving Miami, saving the world. And it's interesting because you have all these major nations in the world, all of whom, or just about, have major problems with sea level rise. Now, so the question is, can a supplemental target or like an upper limit to sea level rise drive policy? And it would seem to me, and we haven't fully tested this, but that a politician, by pointing to sea level rise, can succeed where pointing at some vague, global warming, much more vague statement, is not. And we'll see if we get that far. And but what it does do, it's interesting what it does to the subject of today's session, that part of it, the climate intervention, geoengineering, whatever you're going to call it, is the question is, when you start to look at the sea level rise estimates out into the future, what role can solar radiation management or what have you play in that? And I think this might actually cause a greater demand for analysis and testing and modeling than we currently have. There's one, and I don't know the answer to this. One thing I was going to suggest looking at is, and I don't even know if it survived the Trump scandalous elimination, which is ARPA-E, Advanced Research Projects Administration Energy, if you know about. It's a major agency investing in speculative technologies, and that might be of some interest if it made it through the Doge era. So that's what I wanted to say. Happy to answer some questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rafe. We will go on to I will present, and then Jake, and then we'll have the questions for the panel. So if you have a quick question for Rafe, go ahead. I see Greg, did you have something you wanted to ask Rafe right away?
Yeah, maybe. Thanks for your presentation, Rafe. I just have it's just difficult for me to see how this maximum, I guess you're trying to put a cap on or use the cap on sea level rise rate as the argument. And I mean, we know that the sea level is rising right now. It will continue to rise. It will just rise more and more and more, whatever, unless even if you got to zero as your cap, it's already rising, and the caps are melting in the Greenland and Antarctica. And I see your argument as effective for, if you bring down the rate far enough, then people can pour trillions and trillions and trillions to putting the world on the cities on stilts. But I don't think you can actually save masses of people from, forced migration and the flooding out of the seafronts by trying to mitigate sea level rise. And no matter how much you spend, and there won't be enough money to spend on this, and it will be the poor who will be shafted once again. So I have a problem with using this as a strategy in the sense that it ignores the consequences of that strategy as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, that's my comment. If you want to reply, I don't.
Yeah, what I would say is the way we have looked at this is that if you examine the forecasts of the rate of sea level rise, I don't know if the rate varies hugely with the rate of emissions, okay? I.e. with the rate of planetary warming. So if you maximize reductions of emissions, and then you can supplement, if you can bring in geoengineering options, but it makes a huge difference, and it may make the difference for 500 years, and it may make the difference for the fate of Antarctica, which is dozens of meters of sea level rise. So I can't agree that an intervention here wouldn't provide significant breathing room. I've never used that term before, but that the difference between doing nothing and doing an enormous amount is huge. Is huge.
Thank you. And that is a very good segue into the next presentation here, which will talk about some of those options. We've been talking a lot about the risk scenario we are facing, and that unfortunately is the world we are in. We have to do something. We can't afford not to do anything. So I'm going to talk about specifically the cooling part, the Band-Aid part. And again, I fully agree, and HPAC fully agrees, that this is not a fundamental solution. This is a Band-Aid. This is a sort of a way to give us time to do the more fundamental things that we need to do. But so let me just, without further ado, first of all, this little slideshow here is meant to provide resources. So I know, it may be a little bit much for an audience, a kind of a speaking audience to catch everything here on the run, so to speak. But just to have this resource out there, I think will be valuable for those of you who want to go back and look at some of these things and think about it a little more and read about it a little more or listen about it a little more. So let me first point out that we have a website, healthyplanetaction.org. And actually, I should have mentioned this earlier. We also are doing an online conference. I think it's October 15th, 16th, with many very prominent world leaders involved on what's the plan. That we are actually on target to hit 2.0, past 2.0 by the 2040s. Or before the 2040, if cooling proceeds at the rate that it has. It has doubled in the last decade, the rate of warming. So, this is a conference meant to focus the mind. We can't dilly-dally. We can't, push things down the road. We really need to do something about this. So that conference, those of you can look at the website and find out about it. The reason I am brought up this slide is that in that slide, if you go down to the middle of the landing page, the front page of the HPAC website, you will see this little button here. It says, see full plan matrix and expanded tables here. So if you press that little button, a couple of slides just outlining of the broad HPAC perspective, that is basically we've been talking about, that things are running out of control and we need to do something quickly, and therefore we believe that only climate intervention with volcano imitating stratospheric aerosols started soon, possibly augmented by methane oxidation and methane reduction and some other methods that we'll talk about, will be able to exert the kind of global cooling 0.15 to 1.0 Celsius reduction that's reducing temperature, not just reducing the rate at which things get worse, which is basically what you do when you're cutting emissions. You're just reducing the rate at which things get worse. You're not actually pulling things back. So there's a big difference. These are methods to pull things back in terms of temperature. You don't get that from emissions reduction, as Herb pointed out, in a very articulate way, until you actually draw down enormous amounts of really trillions of tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere and oceans. Okay, anyway, so that's our major strategy. Then I'm not going to go through the entire PowerPoint because it would repeat a lot of what people were talking about right now, but I will go to slide, it's slide 8 of that PowerPoint. And in that PowerPoint, you will see this matrix. And each one of these things, by the way, has a link. See, there you go. I could follow that link, and that will give me a set of references. So there's explanations for all the column headings, for what the values mean, for all the different methods. There's references for all those different methods if you click on those links. So there's a lot more in this. There's a lot of links to references and other things to look at in this particular matrix. But I'm just going to try and review it very quickly. It's slide 8, descriptions of methods. So first of all, we describe the methods, and then we have a few characteristics whether you are putting aerosol up in the stratosphere, for example, to reflect sunlight, to cool. That's one way of doing it. Another way is to reduce short-term species like methane. Methane is the dominant one, and also greenhouse particles like black carbon. So those two methods, as you'll see in our first set of slides, actually have the potential to provide immediate near-term cooling, because for methane, the cooling is related to the rate of emissions, not to the stock, because it drops out so quickly. So it's quite different from long-term greenhouse gases like CO2. And black carbon's the same thing. So that's the pulling things out. And then finally, whether the cooling would occur from a continuing effort, like you'd have to put up those aerosols constantly for a long period of time to rebalance the energy flow in the planet, or a once and done effort, like you can oxidize the methane, and if you can get that methane out of the atmosphere, it's out. And presumably you also cut the emissions of new methane. Some of it is natural, so it's unavoidable. Anyway, so that's that one. And then there's a lot here for one slide, but these are the criteria. So we have, the first one is, does it reduce the risk of tipping points? That would be column E. Column E, yeah, F. Does it? Yeah, what's the time to large? So the first one is, let me go back a little bit, sorry. You've got to do this quickly. So these are near-term cooling methods. So we want methods that can scale up quickly, within 20 years, hopefully. Anything that takes longer than 20 years, we're saying it's not going to help us in the next few decades. So we need ability to cool quickly. So that's the first thing. And that gives us a set of 10. Out of those 10, we pick the ones that will contribute provide the greatest reduction in risk, tipping point risk. They have they can scale up maybe even faster than 20 years, scale up to global potential. They have a small risk of adverse consequences compared to not using them. So that's the risk-risk trade-off that Arya was referring to, because too many of the critics just point to, there's this risk, this risk. Yeah. But what about the risk if you don't deploy this? That is a huge risk. That's something we know is just coming down the road. And then the potential magnitude. So again, how much cooling will they deliver? Will it be 0.5 or could it be even more? And so forth and so on. I don't want to. So we go through all those, and then we come up with an ordering. So we take those 10 methods and we order them by these priorities. First, tipping point risk reduction. Which ones provide the greatest? Second, what is the deployment time? Which can be deployed fastest? Third, what are the risks compared to non-use? And fourth, the magnitude. So if you look at this slide again here, these first four, so there's 4, 4, and 4. So 4 methods, we believe, have the substantial potential to reduce the risk of reaching a tipping point. And they are, and we've ordered, so they all have substantial, so they're all in that first group of methods. And then here you can see the ordering by time. So the fastest would be to just reduce methane emission. And that kind of relates to agricultural stuff. And the cows emit a lot of methane, rice fields, oil wells emit methane. And people are working on this. People know this. This is a known greenhouse gas, and it overlaps with the emissions reduction agenda. But what we're saying is let's prioritize these short-term emissions of species, in particular methane, because they are, that way we can get cooling quicker. We can get the kind of rapid cooling that we need. Okay, and the risks we're saying are negligible and so forth. Then the next one is polar stratospheric aerosol injection, and that's the one that we've been talking about, mimics the volcanoes. So in 1991, Mount Pinatubo, major eruption from the Philippines, and it cooled the planet for about over a year and a half or so by over half a degree, somewhere half a degree, a little bit more. Nobody even noticed it. Right? There were no huge adverse consequences of anything. It's just global warming stopped for that, basically for that year and a half. Nobody even noticed. So we have an experiment, and we have a fellow named Mike McCracken, who's was chief climate scientist at Livermore Labs for years and years, and then he was loaned to the White House to be the chief policy guy for several Democratic administrations. He did the first climate assessment, U.S. climate assessment. I mean, he's a leader. Probably one of the major senior leaders. We'll have to questions at the end here. I'm sorry. What was that technology? Stratospheric aerosol injection. Is that? Yeah. So anyway, Mike points out that stratospheric aerosol injection is not something we have to test whether it's effective. We know it's effective. We have volcanoes have been doing this for throughout the planet's history. We know it works. It's really what we have to look at is the engineering, how to optimize it, how to make sure it doesn't have how to do it in a way that will avoid unforeseen consequences, and that, as Herb pointed out, we need to look at that, and there have been multiple studies that have looked at that. Some of them have been the monsoon disruption. There was one large volcano in one hemisphere that caused the monsoon to disappear for a year, but that's because it's unbalanced. So yeah, you got to do both hemispheres. That's why when you do the poles, you have to do both poles if you're going to have significant cooling. There's the issue of ozone depletion. Again, there have been studies saying, yeah, you might, if you do it in the Antarctic in particular, you could have some impact on ozone, but it wouldn't be catastrophic. It would be, 10%, 15%, depending on when you did it, where, and how. And in the northern hemisphere, it could actually increase ozone. So it's a mixed bag, and if you do it carefully, you can compensate for that. It's a risk that you can, at least according to the models, adjust for and work around and deal with. There's the issue of, well, you're putting up sulfates into the stratosphere. Isn't that we just tried to stop doing that with acid rain? True, but we're putting up much less, like 1% of the sulfates that we've emitted in the troposphere, in the lower atmosphere, and most of it comes down in the polar regions. So this does not seem like something that's going to have a huge, sulfate, cause a huge sulfate problem for humans and living species. Part of it's because it's so efficient. When you do the cooling way high up, you don't need as much. The sulfates down in the troposphere also mask. They also shade the planet and cause more cooling. But those are sulfates we're trying to get rid of. They're from fossil fuels, and you need a lot more of them to have the same impact. Although there is something. So I know. Am I running out of time? Well, we'll see. Anyway, so those are so, and then we have the poles. Doing this in the poles is important because the way this works, it's not a switch you can flip. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there that geoengineering is this kind of magic solution that you can just flip. And the fleet of 300 planes or whatever, it's cost about in the tens of billions. It's really quite inexpensive compared to the other things, but it's not quick. It would take a few decades to actually develop the customized fleet. You could start though early in the poles with some of the aircraft that we already have because the troposphere is lower in the poles. And the poles, by the way, are also experiencing much faster warming than the mid-latitudes, which is causing a lot of the climate problems that we're experiencing right now. It's 4 times as fast in the North Pole. So for various reasons, when you put it up in the stratosphere, it circulates across latitudes, and then gradually comes after a year and a half or so, it falls out over the poles. And so if you were trying to target this and do like a local SAI thing, really the only place you could do this is in the poles, because you can put it up in the spring when the sun's out, in the spring in the Arctic and the spring in the Antarctic, and then it will fall down because you're putting it up so close to the pole, it comes down very quickly. So it will fall down at the end of the summer, in the fall. And you do that in the North Pole, and then you go down and do that in the South Pole. And you could measure that. You could measure that local impact if you did enough, pretty well, because you are localizing the effect. You don't want to do it in the winter, obviously, because it's not doing anything. There's no sun. So that is the reason for the polar SAI as the pilot, the way to start this and build it up gradually and try to get some traction with this. The other 4, and then global SAI would take longer. But one of the things with the Arctic, the polar idea is it would be a save the polar ecology program. It would be like saving the Great Barrier Reef, which is where people are doing right now marine cloud brightening to try and that has encountered very little resistance because everybody in Australia wants to save the Great Barrier Reef. They realize what a catastrophe this is, that reef is dying. And so the Arctic's the same thing. I mean, it's warming 4 times faster, and it's just, it's wrecking havoc with the Arctic environment. So if you could get the Arctic, the indigenous people there, and the poles especially, and the powers that have jurisdiction there, the coalition of the willing, you could say, okay, let's do something to save the poles. And if that worked, then that might build confidence and trust to expand it to a global program. So that's why you start with the polar, then you do the global as the next one. That's number 3. Number 4 is the black carbon, which again would fit with the existing program. Then the next 4 are potential to have a modest effect, and I'm just going to read these off because I'm running out of time. Ease ship fuel regulations. We have 2 papers, 2 HBAC papers, peer-reviewed papers, one of them talking about 14 different methods for cooling. You can look at Oxford Open Climate Change. The other one is an open letter to the International Maritime Organization to relax their regulations on sulfate emissions, on bunker fuel emissions by shipping in the high seas, in the open ocean, and just keep the regulations in the port areas. Based on a study that has been a modeling study that was done before those regulations came into effect in 2020, where they reduced 80% of the sulfate emissions from this very dirty fuel that ships use, bunker fuel it's called. And it caused a jump in warming. It literally, that one thing caused 0.2, or there are some estimates that are much higher than that, of Celsius warming because we took away the tropospheric aerosols. And the study says, well, you could get most of that cooling effect if you just let them do that in the high seas, and you get most of the health effect because it is harmful to humans, having the sulfates, breathing in that stuff, by just having those restrictions in ports near human habitation. And we've been begging them. We got it published in the Oxford Open Climate Change, peer-reviewed. There were no comments. It just went right through. We have it all documented with 20 or so, all these studies that are showing them. It's an actual termination shock, and that was from well-intended regulations that actually caused a jump in global warming. So we say, let's take on that. That would be pretty quick. Do that in 5 years. Black carbon, I think I read. The 4th one here at the top is actually oxidizing methane that's already in the atmosphere. So the black carbon is in the 2nd tier. Tropospheric aerosols is our follow-up in that paper where we say why don't you replace those tropospheric aerosols with something else, like perhaps marine cloud brightening or some other kind of more benign aerosols, and when you shift to non-fossil fuels, because we certainly support shifting to non-fossil fuels, but why don't you, let's try not to also take away the cooling effect. Maybe the ships can play a positive role in maintaining that cooling effect. So that's number 7. Number 8 is marine cloud brightening that people have talked about. It's marine stratocumulus clouds. You put sea salt up there, and that causes them to be more reflective, and that's well known. It's the technology is a little bit difficult to get the right size particles up at the right rate. So it's been a little bit of a, I think, difficult, but we think it could be a very useful and certainly at more regional, local levels. It probably would not work on a global level because it's not uniform. One of the great things about SAI is it's uniform. The stuff mixes and spreads in the stratosphere in a uniform way, unlike any of these other methods. So you don't get these unbalanced, all these kind of adverse things from cooling in one place and causing problems in another place, which there are studies that showing, marine cloud brightening could, if you did that like that. Yeah, okay. So I will stop here. Those of you who are interested, and thank you, Bill, I get kind of excited and can't stop here. Let me just, I have a couple of here at the end slides that talk about, some of the more detailed things that, and with a bunch of references that you may find useful. And I will stop there, and we will move on. Yes, let's get on to, if you don't mind, to Jake, because he's not going to have a lot of time here.
Cool. Thank you, Ron. I know there's 15 minutes left in the program, so let's do a really quick intro of some of the political side of things, which has not really been...
Sorry, Jake. Go ahead.
No worries. And then we'd love to hear some questions and have a little more conversation as well. So thank you guys for having me. Truly an honor to be part of such a distinguished panel. My name is Jake Schwartz. I am at Chesapeake Climate Action Network, running their solar geoengineering advocacy program. So we are, as our name denotes, a regional climate group. We started off doing mitigation work in Maryland, and then grew to be a national group. And now we're working on this international issue of climate intervention. We get a lot of questions like, why are a Chesapeake Bay group working on solar geoengineering? And the answer that our executive director, Mike, gives is, we're really involved in every mitigation fight of the last 23 years. Mike went to the White House for the signing of the IRA, and he came home that night and he was deeply sad because he'd done all you could possibly hope for in America in terms of clean energy and mitigation. And even if it was all implemented, which we now know it of course was not, it still wasn't good enough. And everyone who knows the climate science knows that even the best we can do in mitigation truly isn't good enough. And that's what led him on the path of intervention. And so now we as an organization are advocating for research to better understand what this might look like decades in the future so that policymakers have a more well-rounded view. So we are doing a lot of that work on Capitol Hill, and then also within the climate movement, trying to convene groups to bring this conversation into the mainstream of the climate movement so people can have these conversations kind of all over. So quickly going through some of the kind of political aspects here and what that means for this movement. So just in the last 3 months, this conversation around climate intervention has taken on a whole new dimension. So just since May, the UK has launched a brand new research program into this called ARIA, which is now the world's largest public research program into climate intervention programs. China, who we know for over a decade has been doing some research, is scaling up their program as well, but we don't know exactly how much or what. And then here within the States, as I was talking about, different climate groups are getting involved. We had a workshop of 22 climate groups around the country came to DC this summer and met and discussed this. It goes from progressive national groups to local groups to conservation groups that only work in mitigation, sun and adaptation, are now having real conversations about climate intervention. And actually, just 2 days ago in New York, EDF had their first ever public programming and public event about geoengineering. And that just shows that the tide really is shifting within the movement too. But there's also been some bad news over the last 3 months. There's state ban bills that ban this research of any kind around solar reflective methods were passed in 3 states this year: Tennessee, Louisiana, and Florida. And then Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, inspired by the Florida bill, introduced a similar bill called the Clear Skies Act in Congress. And that is not likely to get a committee hearing, but now it's part of the rhetoric in Congress. And now all the conspiracy theorists are jumping on this because they think people are controlling the weather using chemtrails. And, that might sound ridiculous, but she had a congressional hearing on exactly that not 10 days ago. And Mike actually was the expert witness called by the minority and did a really excellent job, talking about climate science and talking about what these terms mean and why we need to have this conversation. So we're not advocating for deployment. We're not even saying we should do this thing. We don't know if we should do this thing. The whole point is that we need to research it now, like right now, so that we can know in the future if it is worth the risk. Because everything, as has been said multiple times tonight, needs to be viewed through that risk versus risk framework. So quickly touching on kind of next steps for the movement. So groups like CCAN are educating policymakers on the Hill. We are educating state lawmakers so they can fight back against these state ban bills. And we're also, again, having these conversations not only with American NGOs, but with international NGOs. So these same conversations can be had in, let's say, the Arctic countries. As you said, Ron, that is kind of an obvious place for the next step of this conversation. And before that happens, the climate conversation needs to incorporate the climate intervention part of that conversation. And that's not something that's there yet, right? We have years and years worth of making this idea mainstream. And that means bringing it to climate think tanks and climate academics and climate policy experts. And yes, one day climate policy makers will have to talk about these issues around the world. And that's the only way we can get it into the mainstream and the only way we can get the buy-in from people. Because the only way this happens is a grassroots, people-driven, justice-driven, governance-driven framework. And none of those things are there yet. So we have many, many years work of organizing, hearing from people, incorporating feedback, and further research until we can do that. But we are on the way, and we're fighting this path because, as every other speaker tonight has said, it's time we have to start considering these, plan Bs like intervention because the stakes are simply too high.
Thank you, Jake. Yeah, excellent. Yes. So, and I think that, as I said, CCAN is, I think this approach is, not surprisingly, people are realizing that something has to be done, and I think that beyond, in addition to the existing climate policy, we need to add this intervention. Okay, so I have one person up, Greg.
Thanks. Thank you, Jake Schwartz, for your presentation. Very quick, but a lot of information. Thank you. And I applaud your efforts, of course. You mentioned you have convened a meeting about a lot of climate mitigation groups. And it was like the first time ever you'd managed to get them together. I'm interested in that. I'm interested in what the response was from all these groups. I don't know if there are videos or proceedings of this at all that I could get an idea of what were the conclusions, whether their positions moved at all. But the other point I wanted to make is that, from my perspective, I can't emphasize enough the need to do the first test. And so far, there is a ban on any test, down to the picogram level of, just absurd levels of putting anything in the atmosphere. This is for the SAI, and also for marine cloud brightening and anything where you're going. But these people are against any kind of tests. Certain small ones are being done for some types of methods. But in terms of atmospheric tests now, the reason I regard this as so important, first of all, right now, the opponents of any consideration of this, of cooling, are getting by use of bans, by either shunning or bans or just making it unacceptable to even consider. And so as long as they can prevent any test, open air test, they can block it. As soon as you start having tests, they have to negotiate what kind of tests. And that's what I want to see done. But beyond that, very important that we test the models. Right now they're doing all these, even though these are supercomputer models using millions of CPUs, et cetera, and spending millions of dollars, those models have limitations, very significant limitations. And we cannot determine the errors in those models one way or the other without doing real world tests. The first test would be like a plane full of SO2 going into the stratosphere, and then heavily monitoring the release of that and seeing the atmospheric chemistry, which is not known well enough to model correctly. So
yeah, Greg, I can take that.
Okay, so I even if you put a kiloton sounds like it's a big number, maybe, but it's nothing. In the stratosphere, it would be. I challenge anyone to show that it would be detectable in any way by somebody on the ground. It would be undetectable because of the way it circulates and then filters out slowly. So,
Greg, let Jake. We only have
all right,
5 minutes here, so yeah.
Yep. So real quick on the workshop this summer, the response was, yes, we understand that this is a hard conversation, but we need research. And there is a public outcomes report on that on CCAN's website. I can put that in the chat later.
Yeah, thanks.
On testing, it is a really, really complicated conversation. We absolutely cannot rush into it. Mike made some really, really good points earlier about FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent. It is of the utmost importance. Of course, every single test needs those 4 principles. And historically, they haven't had that. And that's wrong. And there's a reason those tests didn't end up happening, and it's good they didn't end up happening because they didn't have FPIC. But the answer to that should be, all right, in the future, let's design more just, more equitable tests that do incorporate those principles instead of just saying, oh, we're never going to test it. Because to your point, Greg, of course we need to test it. The models alone, simply aren't good enough, not even close. And there is some stratospheric data collection happening. NOAA runs a very small program that does data collection using NASA planes, and they're getting a sense of what's currently there. But yes, one day we will need to do more tests. There's a lot more work on the governance side of things that we need to do before we can enter that phase of the science.
Okay, thank you, Jake. I have actually more questions. I forget your name. Sorry, Mike. Another Mike. yeah.
Mikey Wagen, Energy Justice Network. So you had a lot of criteria on there, a lot of words to read. I didn't absorb it all, so I'm sorry if I missed some of them. But when I think about a lot of these type of proposals you're talking about, including direct air capture and a lot of these like spray things into the atmosphere, like the seawater into the clouds, there is a huge amount of energy that is needed to do this. And a lot of it also involves huge amounts of materials that would need to be mined. And then, of course, the energy, you have a lot of materials that need to be mined or drilled for that, even if it's solar. So to scale any of this up to any kind of meaningful level, do you have criteria in there to look at that and what the consequences are and how that compares to if we're talking about a certain amount of like terawatts of energy, of electricity capacity to do any percentage of what would be meaningful here, and we say we had that amount of solar to be using on this, how could we get a lot further if we took that same solar energy and used it to stop burning fossil fuels directly? You're shaking your head no, but have you done studies? Like, how do you know?
Unfortunately, so there are references. There's actually been quite a bit of work on. There are actually references by this guy Wake Smith actually thought out the entire logistics of starting a polar SAI. He called it a fire extinguisher program in case the AMOC in case the AMOC collapses, so we can pull out our fire extinguisher and try and prevent that. AMOC this is the Atlantic Meridian overturning circulation that would cool all of Europe and shift agricultural belts and just wreak havoc around the globe. That has been slowing down markedly due to global warming. So that's just one of the tipping points. Anyway, so The thing is, in terms of energy, it's a very small, it's a less than 1% reflection, more reflection would rebalance things. And if you do it up in the stratosphere, you can do it very, very efficiently. So actually, both the cost and the energy, sulfur there's plenty of sulfur in the world. There's no problem with, getting sulfur. And the resource use and the financial wherewithal to do that is really very, very easily procured. The issue is, this is where I wanted to, the major issue beyond some of the natural science side effects that I talked about, a few of them, is the governance. And before I get to Herb, let me just show you this one slide that just so you know it's there. Yeah, this one. So you can see there's a number of different ways this could come about if you look at that slide. We recognize that it's a big lift. It's a huge lift. And that's why the idea is this, coalition of, like the space station, coalition of the willing. If they're doing it transparently, a lot of countries involved, that might build trust if it works. And that's part of what we're trying to get to. Herb, you wanted to comment on this? Yeah, and you.
Yeah, just very briefly. What I heard you say, Mike, I think you were referring more to the intensive energy requirements of various CDR approaches. And I think I see Ron shaking his head. I think we would all agree that the state of CDR is, yes, we totally agree with you. That's one of the reasons it hasn't scaled up and why it's highly unlikely to scale up in a relevant time frame because it is so energy intensive. I mean, there are approaches, we don't have time to get them in, about using surplus solar. But I think what Ron is trying to say is there's an entirely different energy ratio when it comes to cooling approaches, not just for SAI. I wanted to give you one anecdote. Well, it's not an anecdote, one analysis, and then I'll shut up here. And that's on marine cloud brightening. This brilliant engineer at Exeter University, Stephen Salter, who designed many of the prototype vessels that might spray the salt up into the atmosphere, calculated that he could cover the North Atlantic with enough vessels to significantly cool, I don't know if it's the entire hemisphere or very large portions of it. And when he amortized the cost of those vessels, it would turn out on an annual basis to be no more than the cost of providing security for the Glasgow COP a few years ago. That's how cheap it was.
Yeah. It was
again, it's distinguishing CDR from solar geoengineering in terms of energy.
Yeah, that was Stephen Salter, who unfortunately died as our paper was coming out. So we kind of dedicate that paper to him. But and there is, as there is some issues with regional versus the way that would transfer in the global system. But Stephen didn't have a climate model to work with. He was doing a sort of see the pants calculation. But just making the point. Okay, I think we are done. Thank you all very much for your patience. I really appreciate you guys sitting here listening to all these, this stuff. But I hope it has been useful and stimulating, and that we can spread the word and hopefully start working on this. Thank you all.
Thank you.